Welcome, friends. It's time to elevate and thrive. And on today's show, I have Dr. Angela Yeagley and Dr. Julianne Morello. What's up, ladies, and welcome.
Hello.
So today we're talking about burnout, which can happen for a lot of different reasons. And especially, I think over these last couple of years, burnout has been a real issue for people.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I feel like this year is probably put burnout, or the last 2 years, on steroids for people because of so many restrictions and change of, routine and lack of support and loss of your, part of your community. So yeah, I think it's a real issue. And I think that's why we see so many of our counselors and psychologists and everybody, they're so booked out. They're just so, you can hardly get in, because people just need, they're struggling.
And I think personally too, just like being a healthcare worker is just like 2 years of, it really, our day-to-day didn't change very much, but we were dealing with people scared of a pandemic and then having to wear masks and, and then even like education workers, I really feel for all of them, like all of our teachers that came in, they were so stressed.
Yeah, so stressed. Stay-at-home parents, as we were
yeah.
discussing beforehand.
Yeah.
Yes, so hard. It's so
And
hard to have your kids at home
Yeah,
full-time.
and the reason why I wanted to talk about it like today was I think hopefully, knock on wood, we're now like seeing some of the restrictions being lifted, and a lot of people are feeling comfortable to like hang out, that now we can actually look back at the last 2 years and recognize that we are burnt out and we're tired and talk about like, how did we cope?
I know.
Yeah,
how did we make it through? We
Oftentimes
did.
not in positive manners,
Right.
right? So I
Yes.
think when we're talking burnout, we're really talking about stress, right? Unrelenting, unremitting stress. The kind of stress that then starts to show up and cause, all kinds of different issues for people from a mental clarity standpoint, mental fog standpoint, from emotion, depression, anxiety, all across the board. And also has a huge impact just on like our bodies hormonally, from a blood health standpoint, cardiovascular standpoint. Really, a chronic stress and burnout has very bad.
Very bad. Yeah, it's difficult. And it's difficult sometimes, I think, for people to pull out of it. Once someone is kind of deep into that feeling of not feeling supported or depressed, and so today I think it would be really good to talk about some of the resources that we talk to people about, to help them. And I do think it takes a team. I think ideally you have a team, like you bring in your social support, you bring in your counselor, you bring in your doctor as well, right? Let us help you, as well.
And part of it maybe is maybe talking a little bit about what are some of the, how do you know you're experiencing burnout, right? Because I find that like so often when I am burned out or depressed or down, it sometimes can be hard to recognize from a self-awareness standpoint, because it just becomes like your new normal, especially when we had this long stretch where it has just been so much challenge, so much bad news, so much uncertainty, so many problems to deal with. It's like, oh, wait a minute. I don't even know what feeling good feels like anymore or whatever, right? It's like, so how do you know if you're kind of experiencing burnout?
I would say, I was thinking about this, and I think burnout, as opposed to, temporary, like acute stress or we're not really quite talking about depression here, because that is a whole other thing. But I think depression, there is an element of that, or there can be, right? But burnout essentially is kind of like stress, ongoing stress that is unrelieved by any of your coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
And so you are not finding relief, so it could be, a lot of times people think about like, oh, I'm burned out. Usually they're talking about work, but it doesn't have to be work. It could just be your ongoing, the way your schedule is oriented. Maybe if that's, work and kids and maybe other projects you've got going on, right? That it could be a combination of everything. So
I think so. In the functional world or naturopathic world, we call this adrenal dysfunction. I think before people used to call it adrenal fatigue, but nowadays we don't really call it that, because it's not that your adrenals, which is your stress organs, are fatiguing. It's just that it's dysfunctioning, right? And so when I meet with a patient, most of these symptoms look like not waking up feeling rested. So when you wake up, ideally you have that, really big cortisol awakening response that makes you feel like I'm awake. But people who are adrenally fatigued, they don't get that cortisol awakening response because their adrenals are dysfunctioning. So they wake up and they feel really tired. A lot of patients will say, I'm not sleeping well, and that's because their circadian rhythm is messed up. So, cortisol is supposed to be high in the morning and then decrease at night. And so cortisol makes you feel awake. So of course you're going to have insomnia or difficulty falling asleep because you're just running from a bear all day, every day. Fatigue can also be another symptom. But again, a lot of people don't realize that they're fatigued when they're so burnt out. And I see this a lot with moms, actually, really like busy moms. They're just like,
well, women are nurturers and
yeah,
caregivers.
they're like, well, I think it's nurturers, but I also think when you have kids, you don't have time to really to reevaluate what there is yourself.
No time
kids are first.
Or you have to make
so they're
time.
like, they're like, what are you talking about? You can't think about it. You just have to go, And then another symptom could be like frequent or chronic infections. A lot of people forget that when you're super stressed, your cortisol levels are really high, and that dampens the immune response. So you're going to have viruses like mono get reactivated. You'll have a higher risk of getting infections or be sick all the time.
Yeah, and I know there are different ways that we look at that. There are ways that we can evaluate that, and so usually we like to do some testing. I mean, we can assume based on kind of a symptom pattern or what someone's telling us, but we can check like cortisol levels, DHEA. I like checking thyroid too, just because again, when the adrenals are so stressed, the thyroid is going to try to compensate, right? So. And then a specialty one being melatonin as well. And that one is interesting. Of course, we know that when you don't get that nice drop of cortisol at night, then melatonin has a really hard time because it's inversely related, right? Melatonin has a really hard time then spiking, so you can go to sleep. So therefore, you end up with this, like, oh, now I'm awake. I'm a night owl. No, actually, you have adrenal dysfunction, and now your melatonin, your circadian rhythm is totally thrown off, right?
Yeah.
So
I think another thing that we missed to talk about is sex hormones too. So like another symptom would be you have no libido.
Yeah.
And I mean, it makes sense because you're super tired, but also when you're like, really stressed out, your sex hormones are going to tank, which obviously low testosterone is going to mean you don't have any interest in having sex, which I feel like that's when men start to come.
Usually it's important, right? So if there's difficulty.
And unfortunately, I mean, people will sometimes go with feeling low or no sex drive for a long time before they get help. And it's actually not normal. You should feel like getting the sexy time on periodically.
Yes.
And if it's not happening, I would encourage you to go get it checked out. I mean, go get the blood drawn and see what's going on, because oftentimes, we go back to that question of like, how do you know you're burnt out? I would just, for most people, tell them like, I assume some level of burnout from coming out of the last couple of years, depending on how it personally affected you. But for most people, they've had significant impact from the pandemic and from COVID. And as we're recording this, it's near the end of February, and you have Russia just invaded the Ukraine, and it's like, I was like, man, can we get a break? I mean, can the people of planet Earth get a break from some kind of crazy event happening?
Seriously.
Yeah.
So terrible. I feel so terrible for Ukraine. But anyways, like, so, stress, all this, and I feel like today it's like even more, these things are even maybe more stressful than they were prior to COVID, because to some degree, I feel like we've also become, a world of news junkies too, like even more so. I remember when the pandemic first kicked in, I would just like be hitting the refresh button on my like news feed and like in my news app, reading news articles to try and figure out what the next thing was, what the next bit of information, what the next bit of bad news was going to be, right? So I do think that, most likely, if any of these symptoms like sounds anything at all like you can relate, you probably have some level of adrenal dysfunction going on, or maybe some hormonal imbalances happening that can be corrected. So in that case, we want to test, right? That's what we always start with, testing, and then from there, what do we start to look at? What do we start to recommend in terms of how do we correct burnout, and how do we start to curtail some of these negative impacts?
Yeah. So I mean, I think it really has to be a holistic approach. we definitely have recommendations, and we'll talk about today, of different herbs we really like, higher intervention of that we think of, like IV nutrient, high dose nutrient therapy, of really nourishing your body and giving you your energy back. And I do think there's some relationship there between, when you improve energy, even if you're not taking care of any, people still have the stressors and they still have the things you're dealing with. If you have the energy to cope, then that lessens that feeling of burnout and overwhelm.
Right. So one idea is like remove or reduce stress factors. Stop reading the news. Put your book down. Put your screen down. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so there's that whole like take things away that are causing you stress. But I think there's another argument or another path forward that's about building resiliency, right? So that's what can we put into the system to kind of tip the system over, your system, tip it over into positivity, right? So that you maybe are a little more resilient, a little more grit, a little more drive, and are more fundamentally, from a cellular standpoint, equipped to cope with these stressors.
I think a lot of people forget or don't know that when we're really stressed out, you go through your nutrients really fast. So, 99% of people are already deficient in magnesium, but you're like extremely deficient in magnesium when you're when you're really stressed out. But then also your B vitamins. So getting those replenished, whether it's B12 injections, whether it's IV therapy, definitely does help. And it gives you that like boost, that kickstart to then start to have enough energy to implement all the other lifestyle changes that help with burnout, which is working out, like getting that chi and that blood moving, like wanting to actually have fun.
Having fun.
Having
making time
fun.
for fun.
I think we forget, like last 2 years, like we haven't really had fun.
We're going to be working on some fun
I was just
soon.
thinking about that though the other day. I was like, oh my God, like I'm having to relearn how to socialize. Like I'm like, oh my, I have dinner with a friend and then I have, I'm like, oh my God, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Maybe I should give myself a B12 shot before this weekend so I can socialize.
I do recommend getting an IV before you're going to have a socializing weekend. If I know it's going to be like a fun, go out, hang out with friends weekend, I almost always get the IV.
Well, and I feel like we see that difference, don't we? Like when we put people on those B vitamins and we do that consistently for them, like we watch them transform. I mean, we really do. We're like, oh, you see them, they're like popping in here, a little pep in their step. And it's exciting. It's exciting to watch that transformation in people, especially when they're coming from a really low level, And I think, beyond nutrients, though, I do think that also kind of stepping back and bringing in resources to help you deal with the things that, your stressors. And I love what you mentioned about, not looking at the news, shutting whatever down, your computer down an hour before bed at least, but like if you say, for instance, you're the parent that is at home, or like you got the kids or whatever, to really, maybe you need to schedule somebody to come and get your kids, or like for an hour for you, or like you might need to bring that stuff in. Maybe you're not going to be able to cope. You need that space, right? You're not going to be able to cope your way through not taking any breaks. You need to give yourself some grace.
It's
there.
Okay to ask for help.
Absolutely.
I think people forget that.
Not only is it okay, it's like necessary.
Yes.
It's absolutely, it's vital.
And I think thinking about things like a babysitter or a child sitter or whatever, so that you can have some fun.
Yeah.
Maybe that's how you have fun, is you schedule some time to go do that with friends or significant other or whatever. Or whether that's bringing in some help like that, so you can get a workout in, or so you can go do whatever you want to go do. Absolutely critical. And yet sometimes we'll hesitate to do that. Whether that's sometimes just even asking help from like friends or family members to like, hey, can you watch the kids for an hour or 2 hours while we go out for dinner? My sister-in-law is here, and I'm always amazed that they don't ask us more to do more for them, because we would, right? It's no big deal. We'll go hang out with baby June, and they can go out and have fun. But I'm always like, you guys neglecting free babysitters right here.
I did that last night, actually. I'm exhausted.
Did you watch a little one? Yeah.
You watched it.
They require for a
Yeah,
lot of
a
energy.
1-year-old and I think he's 2.5-year-old. My friends haven't in the past 2 years. I haven't really been able to go on a
Yeah.
date, and so I said,
There's no childcare these days.
Yeah, like I don't mind like watching your baby for the
Aw.
night, and we did, and it was exhausting, but it was fun. It's rewarding. I'm really glad that my friends got to be able to go out, and it's really funny though to watch parents like let go of the reins. It's like, just leave the house, we'll be okay. Leave.
Yeah, that is sometimes it is hard.
We can save. We could have a parenting episode.
I
Yeah, we
know.
could have a
Share
parenting
Oh.
episode.
I can share my parenting advice.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you're absolutely right. But I think that I think the point being made here is, looking at, if we're looking at, okay, how do I start to correct? How do I start to feel better? How do I put myself in a position where I'm bringing stuff in that's internally elevating me, but then, how am I removing things? So part of it is looking at your structure of your day, looking at your lifestyle, and seeing, what are those small low-hanging fruit opportunities that really add in some quality time, or to get some you time or get some self-care time, that are pretty easy and affordable, and usually are just a phone call or a text away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing that's helpful too, I recommend acupuncture as an acupuncturist. I recommend acupuncture for stress management a lot. And I think obviously there is value to the practice of acupuncture and working on the qi and the yin and the yang and all the things, and, needling all the acupuncture points. But I also think that I always tell patients, like, it's an hour that you devote like once a week, every other week for you.
Yes.
And you have like the most lovely nap. And sometimes I think like that is therapeutic
Right.
in
That's the
itself.
therapy. Right. Just
So it's like,
doing
honestly,
nothing.
if I didn't even stick the needles in, I think it's the practice of just like you like allowing yourself to have 1 hour to lay on a warm bed. And
Do you put them on the beamer when they do that too?
sometimes I do, depending on what they come in for. Like if they're coming in for, like I had, recently I had a kid who needed a knee surgery, and so I put the beamer on his knee and I did the acupuncture points everywhere else. And that kid surprisingly knew how to relax.
Oh, yeah. I know who you're talking
I
about.
was like, I did not know how to do this at his age. And he's like,
Yeah.
It's out.
ow.
Do you ever, the one, I have to say, there's one right here that is like magic.
tongue.
Oh
Yeah,
my gosh,
yeah.
that is my favorite. And I would agree with you. That's, if I ever have acupuncture, that's pretty much just like a nap on the table, like instantly.
Yeah, and there's a
Yeah.
bunch of stuff like that. I mean, I think about like hyperbaric chambers,
Oh,
right? You're kind of
yeah.
lying in there. I mean, there's cool treatments out there that have like almost a forced element of relaxation in
IV
them.
magnesium is
Yeah,
really
the sauna.
calming.
I mean,
oh,
it's kind
the
of
sauna
very
is incredible.
It's great.
One of my favorites.
If you can swing the Posh Hotel in Leavenworth,
Oh,
that is the spa
place.
hotel where you just live the robe life. That is
Really?
amazing, and they have all these they have like 3 different hot rooms, steam rooms of different temperatures and different smells and stuff.
Yeah.
Cold
Oh.
plunge pool, like outside pool, hot. Oh my God, it's
I'm
amazing.
going.
It's the best. You have to go. And you
Yeah.
live the robe life. You never have to take your robe off. You go
Well-
to breakfast and lunch in your robe,
Mm-hmm.
just robing it up. It's incredible. Hardcore stress reset at the Posh. But one thing I think that's not a stress reset, and that's getting a therapeutic massage.
You don't think it is?
No, I don't. I just
Oh.
had one the other day, and I am still brutally sore from it right over here. It was
So
like they
maybe
got
you
in
had
there.
more like a sports massage.
It was like
an
a
orthopedic
sports,
massage.
therapeutic
Yeah.
sports massage.
Yeah,
That's what I'm
that's
saying.
not,
Yeah,
that's
that's
not
not
relaxing.
Yeah.
You
No,
have to get
it
like
was-
a Swedish,
Yeah. Yeah,
Hardcore.
Swedish is relaxing.
I love those massages.
The
I do
hardcore.
too.
Well,
Yeah,
that's why I
I'm
was
like,
like,
no
I was like,
pain, no gain.
I
exactly.
actually,
That's what I
I get
said, too.
upset. Like if
No, I
someone
want
is
you to
doing
go.
like the light,
No,
I'm like, get in there,
get it
like
harder.
Yeah.
get deeper.
I can put lotion
Yeah.
on myself.
That's
Yeah,
right.
exactly. Yeah, I can rub my own arm. Thanks.
That's
Like
right.
if I'm not feeling it, it's not doing anything.
Yes,
Yeah.
right.
Oh, no, this was great. So, and if you need help, like with this, as with anything, that's what we're here for. So if you're feeling like, oh man, this was great, I feel like I am burnout, or I have some of these, and I've tried some of this stuff, but you want help putting together a personalized plan, and you want, a partner in your health and wellness journey, that's obviously what we're here to do. And we're probably the best at it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would say so.
I'm pretty darn good at it.
We're pretty amazing.
I'm sure there's
I'd
other
say
there's
so.
other good people out
Yeah.
there, but I mean,
We
come
try.
on,
We
no,
should
we're
say
really
we
good.
try.
We
We
try.
try.
Yeah, listen,
Yeah.
we bring a lot of love, a lot of passion to it. So thanks, guys, for being here. This was fantastic. And until then, the next show, watch out for those signs of burnout. And if you need help, book us online or give us a call. See
Love
you
it.
soon.
See you
All right.
soon.
Bye.
Take care. Bye, guys.
Bye.